After 19 years, the case didn't just reopen, it exploded. Kamiyah Mobley. Stolen from the hospital. One test, one match. The missing baby from 1998 wasn't gone. She was alive, and the truth was about to destroy 2 lives at once. They searched for her for 19 years, thinking the story would end in heartbreak. But in 2017, the impossible happened. Kamiyah Mobley was found alive. For almost 19 years, the story held. A baby taken from a hospital became a missing child case, and the girl who was stolen grew up under a different name. From the outside, it looked like 2 separate lives that would never intersect again. But lies that last that long don't survive because they are strong. They survive because nobody forces them to be tested. As Alexis got older, the questions that matter in adulthood started to appear. Where was she born? What documents proved it? Why did certain details feel unclear or incomplete? In many identity cases, these questions don't begin with a dramatic confrontation. They begin with small moments that don't make sense, and the feeling that an answer is being avoided. The person raising Alexis had to protect the lie constantly, even if it didn't look like protection on the surface. A false identity is not just one lie told once. It is a long series of choices. What to say, what not to say, what details to hide, and how to react when someone gets too close to the truth. Over time, pressure builds. A teenager wants independence. A young adult wants clarity. Friends ask casual questions. Schools and jobs require paperwork. Medical situations require records. Even normal life events can expose gaps in a story that was never real to begin with. This is where many long-term abduction cases begin to shift. The missing child isn't found because someone suddenly remembers a detail from years ago. The missing child is found because the present creates a problem the past can no longer cover. The lie starts to fail under the weight of adulthood. At the same time, law enforcement cases like this don't disappear. They remain open, they remain documented. Names and photos remain in systems. Families continue to speak, to search, and to hope that one day a lead will come in. Even when a case becomes cold, it is still waiting for a single piece of information to warm it back up. In the background of this story, one thing was always true. Kamiyah Mobley's real family never stopped being real. Her name never stopped belonging to her, and her disappearance never stopped being a crime. Eventually, something triggered renewed attention, a suspicion, a tip, a reason for investigators to look at a specific person and a specific teenager. These cases often turn on that exact moment, when the investigation stops being a general search and becomes targeted. Once investigators have a direction, the work becomes more precise. They don't need to guess what happened in 1998. They need to confirm one thing in the present. Is this the missing child? And when a case reaches that stage, it becomes less about theory and more about proof. Because at that point, the story is no longer maybe. It becomes a question with only 2 possible answers. Either the teenager is Kamiyah Mobley, or she isn't. By 2017, the lie had lasted nearly 2 decades, but it was now facing something it could not negotiate with or manipulate. It was facing verification, and in this case, verification meant DNA. 2 lives collide. By 2017, investigators had enough reason to focus on a specific teenager living under the name Alexis Manigo. The case was no longer a broad search for a missing newborn from 1998. It had narrowed into something much more direct, the possibility that Kamiyah Mobley was alive and living under another identity. At this stage, the investigation becomes careful and controlled. Law enforcement cannot rely on resemblance or emotion. They need confirmation that will hold up legally and scientifically. In a case like this, the most important step is the one that cannot be argued with later: a DNA comparison. DNA testing changes everything in missing child cases because it removes uncertainty. It turns years of waiting into a clear answer. And for families who have lived inside that uncertainty for nearly 2 decades, that moment can feel unreal even when they have prayed for it. When the DNA results confirmed the match, the story became official. The teenager known as Alexis Manigo was not who she believed she was. She was Kamiyah Mobley, the newborn taken from a hospital in Jacksonville in 1998. For Kamiyah Mobley, this was the moment she had waited for almost 19 years. But the truth didn't arrive gently. It arrived with consequences, because Kamiyah had not been missing in the way people imagine. She had been raised, shaped, and emotionally bonded to the person who took her. For Kamiyah, the confirmation created a different kind of shock. She wasn't being told a rumor or a suspicion. She was being shown proof that her name, her history, and the identity she had built her entire life around were not real. That kind of discovery doesn't just change what you know, it changes who you are. Once the identity was confirmed, law enforcement moved quickly on the criminal side of the case. The woman responsible, Gloria Williams, was arrested. The case that had started with a newborn disappearing from a hospital was now also a case about identity theft, deception, and the long-term consequences of an abduction that lasted almost 2 decades. News of the breakthrough spread fast. A missing baby found alive after 19 years is the kind of headline that travels instantly. But behind that headline, the reality was more complicated than most people wanted to accept. This was not a simple return. It was the collision of 2 lives. For the Mobley family, the joy of confirmation came with pain. They had lost 19 years with their child. They had missed her childhood, her first day of school, her birthdays, her milestones. And now, even though she was alive, they were meeting her as a young woman shaped by a different world. For Kamiyah, the situation was even more difficult to define. She had been taken from one family as a newborn and raised by another adult, as if that was the truth. Now, the truth was demanding space in her life all at once. It wasn't only about meeting her biological mother. It was about facing the fact that the person who raised her had committed the crime that caused this pain. And that is where this case becomes emotionally complex, because DNA can confirm identity in a single result, but it cannot erase 19 years of memory, attachment, and lived experience. The proof was clear. The crime was real, and the truth had finally come out. But the hardest part was still ahead. What happens after someone is found? When people hear that a missing child has been found, they usually imagine a simple ending: a reunion, tears, relief, and closure. But Kamiyah Mobley's case was never going to be simple, because she wasn't returning as a child. She was being introduced to her real identity as a young woman who had already lived an entire life under a different name. Kamiyah had been raised as Alexis Manigo. That name wasn't just something written on paperwork. It was the name she answered to, the identity she built friendships under, and the person she believed she was. When the truth came out, it didn't replace her life. It collided with it. This is the part of the story that many people misunderstand. A person can be a victim of a kidnapping and still have real memories, real attachments, and real emotional bonds in the life they were given. Kamiyah didn't choose the woman who raised her, but that woman was still the only mother she had known day after day, year after year. That creates an emotional conflict that can't be solved with logic. On one side, there's the biological mother who lost her baby and spent nearly 19 years without answers. On the other side, there's the caregiver who raised the child but did it through a crime. And in the middle is Kamiyah, who never asked to be part of either story. For Kamiyah Mobley, meeting her daughter was the moment she had imagined for years. But she wasn't meeting a newborn or a toddler. She was meeting a teenager with her own personality, her own habits, and her own emotional boundaries. Kamiyah had to process joy and grief at the same time. Joy that Kamiyah was alive, and grief for everything that had been stolen. For Kamiyah, the reunion came with pressure. The public wanted her to feel a certain way. People wanted a clear emotional reaction, a clear loyalty, and a clear, happy ending. But the reality of identity shock is not clean. It is confusing, overwhelming, and sometimes numb. In cases like this, the word "found" can be misleading. Kamiyah's location was found, and her identity was confirmed. But emotionally, she was not simply back. She was facing the most destabilizing truth possible, that her life story began with a kidnapping, and that the person she trusted most had built her identity on deception. This also meant that the Mobley family was not just gaining a daughter. They were learning how to become part of her life without controlling it. Kamiyah had her own voice, her own relationships, and her own perspective. Even if the family had waited 19 years, the next steps could not be forced. And that is why the aftermath of this case became complicated. The legal case moved forward quickly once the abductor was identified, but the emotional recovery did not. Families can reunite in a day, but rebuilding trust, connection, and identity can take years. Kamiyah Mobley was alive. That was the miracle part of the story. But the truth was that the kidnapping had shaped everything. It had shaped who she became, what she believed, and how she understood family. And once the truth came out, there was no way to return to the life she had before, because that life was built on a lie. Once Kamiyah Mobley's identity was confirmed, the case moved into its final official phase: accountability. The person responsible for taking her from the hospital in 1998, Gloria Williams, was arrested. A crime that had remained unresolved for nearly 2 decades now had a clear suspect, a confirmed victim, and evidence strong enough to stand in court. From a legal standpoint, this was the moment the case finally had structure again. There is a name attached to the abduction. There is a timeline that could be rebuilt. And there was DNA confirmation that removed any doubt about who Kamiyah really was. But the legal process, no matter how important, could not undo what had already happened. Because the real damage in this case wasn't only the kidnapping itself, it was the 19 years that followed. Kamiyah's identity was shaped by a false story from the beginning. Her childhood memories, her sense of family, and her understanding of who she was had all been built inside that lie. For Kamiyah Mobley and Kamiyah's biological family, the aftermath was painful in a different way. The world could celebrate the fact that Kamiyah was alive, but the family still had to live with the years they lost. They had missed her entire childhood. They had missed the chance to protect her, raise her, and know her through every stage of growing up. For Kamiyah, the aftermath was not about being rescued and returning to normal. It was about rebuilding her identity while the entire world watched. She had to process the fact that her name had been taken from her and that her life had been shaped by a crime she never chose. She also had to decide in her own time what family meant to her now. This case also left a wider impact beyond the families involved. A newborn being taken from a hospital forces the public to confront a difficult reality. Safety systems are only as strong as the people enforcing them. Hospitals are meant to protect the most vulnerable patients, and a maternity ward is one of the most sensitive places in any medical facility. When an abduction happens there, it exposes weaknesses that can't be ignored. In the end, Kamiyah Mobley was found alive after nearly 19 years. That fact alone makes the case unforgettable. But the story doesn't fit into a simple happy ending, because being found did not mean the past disappeared. It meant the past finally had to be faced. This is the echo that remains in cases like this. A baby can be taken in minutes, but the consequences can last a lifetime. A mother can lose 19 years, and no legal outcome can return them. And a child can grow up under a name that isn't theirs, only to discover the truth when their life is already formed. Next on True Echoes. Elizabeth Smart. She was taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night. For 9 months she was hidden in plain sight while the world searched for her everywhere else. 2002, abducted. 2003, found alive. The truth coming soon on True Echoes. Kamiyah Mobley was stolen from the hospital. She was found. But the real aftermath was learning how to live with what can't be undone. Thanks for watching True Echoes. What do you think? When a missing child is found years later, can a family ever truly heal from the time that was stolen? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.